down to 5, because we're a bit short of time now. So digital scholarship is my thing. I've recently written a book. Here's me looking smug with my book. So it's a physical book. You can buy the real thing. Because I really believe in open access, I got it published with Bloomsbury, who also published Harry Potter. Mine will probably not sell quite as many copies as Harry Potter. But it's available as open access online under Creative Commons license. I think that was a very important thing for me. So when I say digital scholarship, I'm really using it as a kind of a shorthand for these 3 things coming together, kind of digital content, distributed via a network, combined with open practice. When you get those 3 things together, then you get transformative practice. So what I'm interested in is how these kind of technologies are changing academic practice. So I've called my thing 10 lessons about digital scholarship, but I should give a big warning. Never trust people who give you lessons about the future, because we're in the middle of a revolution here, and no one knows, when you're in the middle of a revolution, you don't know what it's going to look like at the end. So if someone's telling you lessons about the future, it's because they're trying to sell you something, okay? But I've called it 10 lessons because that's a kind of snappy title. So my alternative title would be something like 10 things I've kind of come to think about the impact of technology when I've been thinking about it, accompanied by 10 videos which may or may not be amusing. But that's not quite so snappy, that title. So lesson 1, I spend a lot of time hanging around with geeks and developers. I like geeks and developers, but sometimes it's like they're talking a completely different language. I kind of know, like as Stephen said yesterday, I know what all the words mean, but you put them together, I've no idea what you're talking about. And so I think it's tempting sometimes to think, and you get involved in these conversations, think it's not for me, it's for these kind of geeks. But it's not for that. I just want to play a quick video here. This is what it feels like for me a lot of times.
Hi everyone, we're from the comedy group Derek.
And we've been getting a lot of emails asking why we haven't been posting videos online lately.
Derek is proud to announce that we're partnering with a new venture that will literally change the way you think about the internet.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gink.
What is Gink? Gink is a revolutionary web portal that will change the way users interact with other users.
Gink is a revolution in the way web users interact with one another.
Gink is a fun made-up word, combining the words gibble and spink, both of which are also made up.
A lot of people say I love Facebook, but what Facebook doesn't allow me to do is connect with friends.
So we took the appeal of Facebook and added the ability to connect with friends. And that's when the fun began.
Gink allows users to accumulate Gink points, or goints. Users can exchange goints with other users, and in return, they receive quimbles.
There are 7 default quimbles. Users can express their creativity through user-generated...
Okay, and conversations quickly end up like that. We're talking about quimbles and goints. What are these things? But I think you should also think about what it's really about is kind of new ways of sharing knowledge, new ways of creating knowledge through networks of people you may never meet. You know, I've only met George last year, I think it was, but I've known George and Dave for a long time online, and you don't need to meet these people. You know, you form this big peer network just by being online. It's a new way of kind of generating ideas and communicating those ideas, not just through the traditional channels. And so we've been talking about a lot here about the kind of democratization. Very powerful things going on here. So those are all kind of scholarly activities. So don't let the kind of technology get in the way of a thing. It's actually about very fundamental change to what we do as academics and scholars. So this is Sir Martin Rees, who's the Astronomer Royal in the UK. He's talking about archive. Do people know what archive is? So in the physics world, it's a kind of pre-publication place, a repository. And he's saying it's completely transformed the way science operates. And for him, it's like you can see the traditional journal disappearing. And so you've got to think, if he's the Astronomer Royal, he kind of knows what he's talking about in this field. So my lesson is, there's something going on here beyond just the geeks. So don't let the geek stuff kind of get in the way. Lesson 2, I think researchers are kind of caught in a dilemma here. On one hand, we kind of have a real potential for doing new things, but we're operating in quite a conservative context. So this is a quick clip of a TED talk by Chris Anderson.
The story starts with just a single person, a child, behaving a little strangely. This kid's known online as Little Demon. He's doing tricks here, dance tricks, that probably no 6-year-old in history ever managed before. How did he learn them? And what drove him to spend the hundreds of hours of practice this must have taken?
Money and money. Step your game up, oh! Step your game up, oh!
So that was sent me by this man, a filmmaker, Jonathan Chu, who told me that was the moment he realized the internet was causing dance to evolve. This is what he said at TED in February. I mean, in essence, dancers were challenging each other online to get better incredible new dance skills were being invented.
Okay, I taught that kid all the dance moves he knows, by the way. But I think I will do later. Yeah. So I think that it's interesting. Cause what he's saying there is like within dance, people are challenging each other via YouTube. It's kind of really speeded up the innovation cycle. And it's interesting to ask the question: could something similar happen in research? And we don't need to wait 2 years to get your research out there. You can be innovating each other. And the key thing is, it's not just, and you've got a kind of global audience to kind of shine this light on. But there's also been a lot of studies done recently of how researchers are using new technology, particularly in the UK, Europe and the US. And the kind of conclusive result across all these studies is that researchers are a bit cautious about it. So this study, Proctor Williams said, frequent or intensive use is rare, and I like the last bit. Novel forms of communication are deemed a waste of time or even dangerous. You're told not to do this stuff. Harley et al. Were looking at early career researchers, and they found that there's no evidence for kind of tech-savvy young graduates coming in and bucking the trend. They kind of tend to get on with what they're told to do. And Carpenter et al. Describe researchers as kind of generally risk-averse and behind the curve in using digital technology. And that's kind of quite strange, I think. It's quite a strange position. So why might this be the case? I think one of the things that always comes up, there's almost like some kind of unwritten law. As soon as you start talking about digital scholarship, within 10 minutes, someone will mention tenure and the sort of restrictions of that. So I think this was one of the other studies. They were saying that the advice given pre-tenured scholars is consistent across all disciplines. It's not just down to one discipline. It's focused on publishing in the right traditional journals and don't waste time doing all this other stuff such as blogging. So kind of we get these, and this is quite unusual, we get these new people come in full of ideas and we say to them, don't do any of that new stuff. Kind of carry on doing the old traditional stuff. And that strikes me that hardly any other industry does that. Kind of in most other sectors, you take the new people, they're the people coming in with like new ideas, fresh ideas, and you encourage them. And here we kind of grind it out of them straight away. So that's an unusual thing in higher education. Is it caution? This is from a Nature article about blogging in science. And he kind of makes the point that in many ways the whole approach is kind of antithetical to the way they've been trained. As a scientist, you kind of think through things very carefully, you gather your evidence, and then you present a very careful, structured argument. Whereas blogging's like, here's an idea I had this morning while having breakfast. And that kind of goes against the way we've kind of been trained. Is it habit? These people were talking about how researchers tend to have the same kind of network. They go back and back to the same network, and often that network's been built up over years with people they know, who they've collaborated before on projects and stuff, and so they're not making use of these kind of online networks to form these new collaborations. So I think just to kind of sum up, there's a kind of tension there between the potential of what we can do with the technology and the context within which we operate in. So my next lesson is trying to work across disciplines is really difficult, but now that interdisciplinarity resides within the network, and particularly I think you can see that in things like Twitter and blogs.
After months of investigation, I finally figured out the purpose of Twitter, and it's this. Twitter is a means by which one can be ignored by celebrities in real time. I'll explain. In the old days, when I was growing up, if you wanted a famous person to ignore you, you had to find the address for their fan club and then send them a letter. A letter written on paper in an envelope with a stamp on it. And you would send the letter off and then you'd wait. And you might have to wait for weeks or even months before finally acknowledging that the person to whom you'd sent the letter was never going to reply. And what Twitter does is make this process much faster, allowing you to experience the same disappointment but almost instantaneously. And I can demonstrate right now.
Okay, so that's what Twitter's for. But apart from that, it also allows you to kind of follow people, because it's kind of very low friction. So I can follow people from different disciplines, and they will share stuff, and people might retweet things. So stuff will be coming to me all the time that might be outside of my own discipline. So I think in order to do stuff across disciplines before, it used to be very costly. So say I wanted to create an interdisciplinary journal, I'd have to think it's quite a small market for that journal. I'd have to kind of find a market and sell it and be assured that people would buy it. But now, say I want to combine, say I'm interested in Japanese poetry and Indian cooking, that's probably quite a niche market. Maybe not people want that, but I can set up a blog around that for no problems whatsoever. I can set up my own online journal. So now it's become really easy to kind of do that kind of interdisciplinary work. And I think that's a kind of real change in what we do in academics. What I also think is really interesting, this is Loic Le Meur talking, is that do these new forms of communities kind of have different cultural norms? So, like Lemire argues, there are kind of certain cultural norms about blogging. You don't get taught these, but when you become a blogger, you kind of pick them up through kind of enculturation, particularly if you want to be a successful blogger. So a number of them are kind of, there's a culture of speed and currency, a need for recognition. There's a kind of a common code of vocabulary and behaviour. You make sure you acknowledge people. So once you become a blogger, there's also a certain way of writing. I think it's kind of fairly informal. You kind of adopt these cultural norms. And I think what's the really interesting question for us as academics is how kind of sticky are these cultural norms? So to put it simply, do they kind of overlay your discipline norms? So might two bloggers in separate disciplines have more in common now than a blogger and a non-blogger in the same discipline? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's interesting. There are these kind of different cultural norms being imposed on our academic society. Okay, I work at the Open University in the UK, and we used to make TV programmes with the BBC, and they're kind of quite famous in Britain. There'd always be people wearing dodgy clothes, and something you'd watch when you come in after the pub at sort of midnight. There used to be anything on in the 70s. And this is a parody of those programmes, not an actual one. But so this is what, in order to do public engagement, you'd have to kind of have a big audience or something like TV to do before.
You know, some of the funniest things that ever happen here in TV never actually make it to our screens. I'm talking about the outtakes or mistakes that we here in television land get so embarrassed about. Here's one of my all-time favourites. It's a great blooper. It was recorded for an edition of Open University way back in 1973.
The non-reflexive integers in the equation by a quantity denoted by d5. The parallel quantities d3 and d7 are inverted in the same direction, giving us a resultant modular quantity of 0.567359. Now this should begin to give us some clues as to whether...
Sorry, Brian, I'm sorry.
What's happened?
You said 0.567359.
Oh no, I didn't.
It should be 0.567395.
I don't believe it!
Okay, and now what we do at the Open University, we still make some programmes at the BBC, but we've started making kind of web native content as well, so I'll quickly show a clip of the kind of stuff we produce.
60-second adventures in thought. Number 6, Schrödinger's cat. Erwin Schrödinger was a physicist, a theoretical biologist, and probably more of a dog person. In the 1920s, scientists discovered quantum mechanics, which said that some particles are so tiny you can't even measure them without changing them. But the theory only worked if before you...
So we do these kind of 60 seconds, and notice they're kind of things that might get retweeted and kind of go viral. It's a very different way of doing it. What I think is even more interesting is not like this is kind of still a very OU production, is when individual academics start producing their own content. And you can kind of think of higher education as a long-tail content production system. We produce all this stuff anyways. Depending on what field you're in, you might produce software code, which you can make open source. We produce lots of lectures and teaching content. We just share ideas. We come up with ideas. I'm thinking this might be important. We produce lots of data from research. We go to conferences, seminars, we run all those sorts of things. We get engaged in debate, and we write research papers. Now, with not much effort, and if publishing companies let you do it, you can make nearly all those things open access stuff with not much effort. You can turn them into digital artifacts which are shareable and reusable. So even as an individual, you're kind of sharing, you're kind of producing all this stuff. And I think digital outputs are kind of slightly different to the type of things we've produced before for public engagement. They're kind of low cost to free, so it doesn't cost me anything apart from a little bit of time to put this presentation up on SlideShare, say. They have a very small audience, whereas like you used to have to think about your audience before when you're producing TV programs, you want to kind of hit 1 million people or whatever. The numbers you're going to get online are usually down in the hundreds. Occasionally, if you're lucky, you get a few thousand. But occasionally they might kind of go really viral and you kind of end up with the millions. They're open, so people can take them. There's no element of compromise. That's the other thing. Like, I know a lot of people who've worked in television. They say, I wanted to get this idea across, but they wanted me to be standing on top of a cliff and fast cutting it, and I had to dumb it down. You can be as boring as you like and this kind of stuff, because it doesn't cost you anything to do it. You can go into the level of detail that you want to go into. You don't have to compromise. They've got very kind of high reuse potential. All you need to do is kind of grab the embed code and stick it in a blog, and you can do whatever. And they follow a kind of different distribution model to traditional broadcast. Okay, this is where I curse Jay, because look at the video I was going to play.
I find that education...
Hey! So, that's right, I must clip some time. So, one thing to say, we're kind of operating in an attention economy now, both when you're teaching and also doing other things. And so one of the things that we were talking about teaching yesterday in Dave's session, you can always think what we produced was a kind of pedagogy of scarcity, because the expert is the rare person. So you bring the expert together and then everyone comes around that person, and the lecture is a kind of a pedagogy of scarcity. And it makes sense then to bring all those experts together in one place, which is a university, and libraries kind of expensive resources, so you kind of house those all together. So that's the kind of model that we've developed. And I won't go into this question now, but it's interesting, what would a pedagogy of abundance look like? If you assume all content is abundant, any subject you want to do, as Jay was saying, why am I bothering to teach, physics at some small university when they could be watching, the Stanford professor, do it on iTunes U? So there's a different approach, I think, to a pedagogy of abundance. And just a small example, I think you kind of need to develop different skills to operate in an attention economy. So, I use SlideShare to put my presentations up on. And I noticed, without meaning to kind of informal learning, I kind of adopted a SlideShare style for my presentations. So the one on the left is kind of when I first started doing it using the traditional OU template, and the one on the right is kind of when you start adopting a kind of a SlideShare style, which usually kind of has quite arresting images and just kind of one piece of text. I think the reason you do that is because hopefully if people are kind of browsing around, they're kind of more likely to click on the one on the right and follow it through. You're kind of fighting for other things to kind of get their attention. And I think that those kind of skills are things we find a bit unseemly, I think, in higher education. It's like, I don't want to compete in an attention economy, but maybe we kind of have to. So lesson 6, I think we also need to kind of start thinking about rethinking what we can do in research. So this guy is talking about building a business, but I think the same thing is applied to research as well.
Watch out when anyone, including you, says he wants to do something big, but can't until he raises money. It usually means the person is more in love with the idea of being big, big, big than with actually doing something useful. For an idea to get big, 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 it has to be useful. And being useful doesn't need funding. If you want to be useful, you can always start now with only 1% of what you have in your grand vision. It will be a humble prototype version of your grand vision, but you'll be in the game. You'll be ahead of the rest because you actually started, while others are waiting for the finish line to magically appear at the starting line. For example, let's say you have a vision of making an international chain of enlightened modern schools. You picture it as a huge world-changing organization with hundreds of employees, dozens of offices, and expensive technology. But instead of waiting for that, you start by teaching somebody something this week. Find someone who will pay to learn something, meet him anywhere, and begin.
So I think there are lots of possibilities now in research. So a few from my own experience. So there's a thing called Google Anotum, which kind of allows you to set up your own, it's kind of a WordPress theme, allows you to set up your own journal. So what I did was I thought, one afternoon, I'm going to create my own journal. So I created Meta EdTech Journal. So what I do is kind of every 3 months, I look through a big list of open access journals, and I find about 10 journal articles I like, and I republish them here. So it's kind of, nothing here is original, so it's a meta journal, and create an issue. So that kind of took me, I don't know if anyone reads it, if anyone has, but it was kind of zero effort. I could do it now. Invent an app today. So these are 3 of my colleagues, Tony Hurst, Stuart Brown, and Liam Green-Hughes. And we developed some Facebook apps for the Open University. And our principle was, pretend we're third-party developers. We've got no specialist knowledge, no insider knowledge, so anyone could come along and do this. And we developed 2 Facebook apps for OU students, which allow them to find each other and share their kind of study story. And they've been really successful. But we didn't need to get permission to do that. We didn't need to go to the OU and say, can we have access to special data? Can we put that? We could create the apps and put them online, and through our own network spread the idea, and they've kind of been downloaded thousands of times. Interrogate data today. So Tony Hurst, I just mentioned, he likes to play around with data a lot. He's got a particular skill in this stuff, so he blogs at this place, OUseful.info. But he likes to take open data, sort of mine the type of thing you find on Twitter, and he uses a lot of these kind of free tools. A tool, I think he's just using a tool called Gephi. And what he's doing here is there's a TV programme in the UK called Sherlock, based on Sherlock Holmes, and the BBC created a blog as if it was Dr. Watson blogging. So he'd looked at who had tweeted the link to that blog, and then how were those people connected. So the top people coming up are kind of celebrities. But you can imagine doing a similar thing for who's tweeted a link to your research findings, and then how are those people connected, and then how can I influence those people who are interested in my research. And again, you don't need permission to do this. You haven't got to get access to special data. You can just go across and do it. So this is Stephen Heppell talking, and I like this quote. He said, "We continue to make the error of subjugating technology to our present practice rather than allowing it to free us from the tyranny of past mistakes." I think that's what we're kind of doing. We're kind of, with research in particular, we're caught in a particular mindset, which is kind of you apply for funding, you do your research, then you publish your article at the end of it. And we can start doing different things. This kind of do-it-now approach is just one aspect of that. So it's a shame Alex not here, because I'm going to boost Alex's ego now. I'm going to play the clip from that course that Alex was talking about. So this was produced by students to kind of advertise his own course. And I think what that kind of demonstrates is that creating a video like that kind of gets people attracted to your course. But you can also imagine it might be a skill we need to develop, things like create videos to advertise your research project. You've got a different kind of audience you might want to reach. And so I think all these things might be skills that you wouldn't need all of them, but someone might be good to have these skills. So create good videos, know how to have a really good network and be a good member of that network and have value from that network. Do things like data visualization. Analytics, George is here, so I won't go on about analytics. But I'm sure most of you have seen Google Analytics, but how many of you have started building that into our research, saying, an outcome of my research will be that I expect to have this many people coming in and reading my site, the bounce rate will be this much, we expect people to stay for this long, and kind of really build your research around the analytics you can get out of it. Stephen's not here today, I don't think, but curation and filtering is kind of a very new role, I think. Someone like Stephen Downes, if you start blogging in EdTech area, you kind of always sign up to Stephen's blog, because Stephen reads kind of hundreds of blogs every day and posts a kind of a filtering of those. And that's a kind of really valuable role. It's a very difficult role to be recognised, I think, at the moment. I'm sure it's very time-consuming as well. But you couldn't put that in as a kind of a refereed publication, yet it's something that people find very valuable. Learning how to write for online. I've been blogging for about 6 years now, but it took me 3 attempts to kind of find the right voice for blogging, I think. And it's a very different way of writing. And it was interesting when I wrote my book, I took about 30,000 words from my blogs, I think that's the starting point for the book. But I had to kind of rewrite all of them because the tone wasn't right for a book. And there's a different kind of voice you need for these things. I've got a colleague, Doug Close, who's a really good live blogger. I'd like him to come along any events I'm at, because he just can sit there and capture it as you go along. It's kind of a very particular skill. The thing is, I don't think we should necessarily be taught these skills. I think I'm quite wary of the idea of digital literacies, because if I came back here next year, I'm sure my list would be completely different. So it's this kind of learning to learn thing. So lesson 8 is going to impact upon you even if you ignore it. You say that this stuff doesn't matter to me, in my subject it's not important, but it begins to have an impact upon whatever you do. There's this nice idea that Adam Greenfield has of network weather. The idea is that you're kind of affected by the network in the same way you're affected by weather.
Quadruple checking notes as people file in, getting the computer ready, and asking everyone to take a seat. Pretending to click something on the computer to cover up the fact that I don't know what to do with myself.
Arriving just in time.
Wrapping up our conversation about a popular TV show we watched last night.
Disdain for popular TV show.
Mediocre icebreaker joke. That doesn't quite land. Attempt to redeem myself by Making fun of that guy.
Laughing at that guy.
Laughing because he's laughing and I like him.
Not laughing, and now checking out for the rest of the session.
Title, dramatic pause, of my presentation.
Question about how long this session will last?
Okay, so I think I've committed most of those sins already on that. But I think an example of how it's going to impact upon you, even if you ignore it, is the conference and the presentation. So he talks. Jay was talking about the idea of the amplified conference. So if people are tweeting about a conference, it kind of goes beyond the room you're in. So I follow a lot of conferences I never attend, which I couldn't do beforehand, and I get an idea of what goes on there. And so so the speaker's voice is amplified, the audience's voice is amplified. Doing purely online conferences. So a couple of years ago, I ran the OU. We have an annual conference at the OU about technology and teaching. And it was kind of getting to be the same people turning up every year. And so they gave it to me to run, but said, by the way, you've got no budget. So I said, okay, I'm going to make it completely online, and we can bring in people from outside. And so it's open to everyone. And so we managed to get Jimmy Wales, Wikipedia founder, as our keynote speaker, because he could do it in an hour's slot when he was changing planes in George's favourite place, Heathrow Airport. So he could go into a room, do a presentation for us, and then go off, which he couldn't do before. And we had people coming in from Mexico and all sorts of things. So an online conference allowed us to do different things. Not necessarily it's better than the face-to-face conference, but it's different. And the back channel is kind of a very powerful tool, both for good and evil. It's like Spider-Man. But having a back channel at a conference is great. So it allows you to be in the same room as people, and you're connecting to those people in that room, and you're discussing stuff. But equally, you might be at a conference and suddenly think, if you're not involved in this stuff, you think, why is this speaker getting a hard time? It might be because in the back channel, people said, last year he said this, he's completely contradicting himself, so that you kind of get this thing that goes around. I think a really good example is to think what a conference archive looks like now. So, 10 years ago, maybe, it would have just been the conference proceedings, maybe in a book, maybe in a CD-ROM. But now, people will post photographs on Flickr, and if they just use the same hashtag, you can see all the photographs of that conference. They'll be talking about the conversation on Twitter. That people might be filming it and streaming it on YouTube. There may be an associated social network. People may be blogging about the conference. So there's a much richer picture about what actually went on at that conference. And so if you're just looking at the conference proceedings, you may not know that actually the really big debate at that conference was kicked off by the keynote speaker, and there was a kind of a big backlash on it on Twitter or something. So you get a much richer picture, which you're going to be separated from if you're not involved in this stuff. But also, I think, and this comes back to some of the stuff that's coming out of Jay's session thing, we're beginning to realise that actually, if you're going to get people together for face-to-face, use face-to-face for what it's good for. So people are beginning to change the format of conferences, because if we're getting everyone together, then let's make that time useful. So the bar camp idea came out of developers, so they kind of get together on the first day and say, what are we interested in? And at the end of the day, they come up with sort of 3 ideas, and the next day they go away and code it. But people have been adapting that for things like TeachMeet, so they get together teachers and kind of follow the same models. It's not a kind of strict format. Some people do a kind of pre-presentation thing, so here's my presentation online, go and view the slide cast or whatever, but in my session we'll actually discuss the issues that come up. We'll use that face-to-face time differently. Or you can vote for presentations, so here are 10 presentations, we're only going to hear 2 of them, vote for which one you think looks best. Or people get together and say, let's produce something, let's make something in the time we're here. So you could turn up to a conference that's always been very traditional and suddenly find they're doing different things here, and that might be because of the kind of network weather. So the next lesson is about alternatives. I think too often people try to cast this stuff as a kind of dichotomy. It's like, this thing is dead and it's been replaced by this, and it's a much more subtle picture than that now. And I think books are a kind of really good example of that, so I'll just quickly play some of this clip. It's a lovely clip. God knows how long it took them to make it. But people love books. People kind of feel very passionate about them as kind of physical artifacts, and I think that's fine. I like books too. I think when we think about it, it's not about you replacing one thing with another, but it's about that you've got a bigger toolbox before. Before we didn't have alternatives. You were like the man with the hammer. You kind of, that's all you've got. But now we've kind of got all these different tools. So if I want to communicate something or publish it, before I had the journal article, that was kind of my only outlet, or maybe a conference paper. Now I think, well, I might publish a journal article, but I'm also going to do a blog post about it or produce a video and different. So I've got all these different options available to me now. And similarly, there may be different research methods. Like I said, you can do some stuff for free now, and different ways of networking. If you wanted to have a good global network before, you kind of had to spend your life traveling the world on the kind of keynote circuit in order to kind of keep up all those contacts. And now, I can have a peer network from my desk where I live in Cardiff. It's great. So be suspicious, again, when people try and tell you X is dead. So the following things are not dead, okay? LMSs, VLEs, the peer review process, universities, teaching, books. They're kind of not dead, but they are operating in a different ecosystem. So think of them as kind of animals that existed in an ecosystem, and you've introduced something new into the ecosystem. They either have to adapt or they may die, and certainly their monopoly is gone. That's the key thing. In the same way that kind of radio adapted when TV came along, and also now radio is adapted to the internet and become a much more different medium, but also a much richer medium. So the last lesson is don't focus just on risk.
But I think it's bad. I think that you shouldn't just do everything that's available to do isn't a good idea. There's a culture right now that as soon as hey, you get to do that, I'm going to do it. There's no sort of like, maybe that's not just the constant. Nobody takes in life unless it comes through this. Yes. Like whenever I see a televised event that's a huge, like the Olympics opening ceremony or a Times Square at midnight on New Year's Eve, everybody, they see seas of people all looking at it through their phone. Yeah. Like there's explosions and acrobats, but they're looking at it through a little 3-inch screen. Like I think if Jesus comes back and starts telling everyone everything, everybody's just going to be twittering and they won't.
And there's been a number of books recently, kind of by intelligent commentators. So Nicholas Carr, who did an article called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" He kind of argues that we're kind of all destined to become stupid and dysfunctional and kind of lessened by the technology. Jaron Lanier argues you're not a gadget. Says we're placing technology in a very kind of powerful position, and it's dehumanizing us. And Sherry Turkle in Alone Together argues kind of the more we communicate, some ways kind of the more isolated we become. And I think there's something in some of those arguments, but what they're all doing is kind of posting a very kind of dysfunctional view of the future. And going back to the 5-minute university, I did psychology as my degree, and the one thing I do remember is this. Tversky and Kahneman, two psychologists in the 70s, did prospect theory. And what they say is we give risk and loss more weight. So if you lose 10,000 rupees, then the pain you feel is more than the joy you feel when you find 10,000 rupees. That's a kind of psychological fact for people. So because we give loss more weight, we tend to focus on risk. And I think this is true when we think about the changes that can come. So we think, if I start putting my stuff up online, the argument often is like someone might pinch my ideas. We can see the bad things that might happen, but we can't see the good things that might happen. We can't see the benefits. So James Bond is a very good commentator and stuff. He says that we're very good at seeing the downside and dangers of open systems and networks. And he says that some of those dangers are real. He's not dismissing them. But he says we're not so good at seeing the benefits. And equally, the kind of converse holds true for the closed system. We don't see the bad things in it. And I think the academic publishing model is a really good example of that. If I tried to pitch the academic publishing model to you now, you would think I was insane. It's like, so you produce all the content, you do all the work and the editing, and then we take it off you and sell it back to you, and we make all the profit. And you'd go, that's a good model? That's insane. We kind of don't see that because it's there. But we can see, but we are good at kind of projecting possible downsides of the open system. So just to recap, it's not just for geeks. Kind of don't let the technology get in the way of thinking. This is actually about very fundamental scholarly activity. There's a problem around this kind of researcher's dilemma around the context within which you operate and the potential for what we can do new things. Interdisciplinarity is a word I struggle to say, but it resides in the network now, and it used to be a difficult thing to achieve. We're all broadcasters, but don't expect to necessarily have millions of views. You're teaching or operating in an attention economy, We may need to learn new skills to do that. We have an opportunity to kind of rethink what we do in research. And it's likely we're going to need new skills, and those new skills are going to be changed all the time. Don't think you can just stick your head in the sand, because this stuff will impact upon you in the kind of network weather sense, even if you don't want it to. And don't think about it just one thing replacing another thing. It's about alternatives. It's about a richer, more complex picture now. And don't make the mistake of just focusing on risk. I think that's something we do a lot. Okay, so now's the point where you clap politely and then tell me that I've been speaking rubbish.